And I've heard you say different types of interpreting. I don't know if there's like an actual word for it, but I've heard, I think, community interpreting thus far, court interpreting, then also medical interpreting. What other types of interpreting are there, and any types of like specializations or anything like
Oh
that?
yeah. There's like the specializations and then there's the subspecializations and then there's niches and I mean it's like that this is why the language professional industry is so beautiful. It's because you don't have to stick with just one thing. Let's say, for instance, Joshua, you don't like the consecutive, you don't want to deal with the note taking, but you do like professional development. Let's say that that's the topic that you just really enjoy, and you like simultaneous. And so, as an interpreter, you can be a simultaneous interpreter that only focuses on interpreting for the individuals that are going out there having conferences on professional development. Let's say it's an author that, you really like and they're out there now doing their little, roadshow for their book and they're having conferences with guests and you could be their interpreter. Or you're really into politics and you want to interpret for all the different politicians that are out there having public forums and things like that, you can interpret and specialize just in that. So now you're a simultaneous interpreter specializing in, political conferences or things like that. So, I mean, there's like so many different specialties. You do have the community, but within the community interpreting, there's specialties with that. We've got individuals that are experts in church interpreting. And so, they could be having mass in English, but then there's the interpreter somewhere in some booth or in some area interpreting the mass into another language. You've got the educational interpreters. That's a specialty in public education where we're interpreting not for the student, but for the parents or the families of the students that speak another language. There's the medical interpreting as well. These could be clinics. There's immigration interpreting. I mean, there's interpreting all over the place. So it just really depends on what you really like. I think that a lot of individuals that begin their journey think of it just as one, we think of it as it's just interpreting, meaning just it's one category. But if you look at it like, say, for instance, you could be a doctor of general medicine. So you see a little bit of everything, right? But you don't really specialize in anything. Or you could be a medical surgeon, a heart surgeon. Even in surgery, there's specialties, so it's the same concept for interpreting. You could specialize in something specific, like simultaneous, let's say, but then you are conference interpreting for the sciences. For instance, I'll give you a quick example. Somebody called me one day and said, "Hey, Mireya, would you be interested in interpreting simultaneous conference, interpreting?" I'm like, "Wow, that'd be a great opportunity. What's the topic?" "Oh, it's archaeology. They just discovered some mummies out in I don't know what, and so they're about to present this to the I don't know anything about archaeology. By next weekend, I'm not going to be able to prepare, and I've never in my life have spoken into the target language about mummies. So while it sounds super interesting to hear, interpreting in that, specific area, because it's such a particular, I mean, that's terminology that's very specific to them. I have to be professional enough to say, well, it's a great opportunity. That's not my area of expertise. And so they have to go with another Spanish speaking interpreter whose area of expertise is archaeology. Wasn't for me.
So I can see that while you were in the children's hospital, the general hospital, you had, I'll say, kind of like your clients or your interpreting jobs within the hospital itself. Mm-hmm. So now you're getting jobs from other people, or is it organization?
Yeah. So what ended up happening is I ended up going from the children's hospital into public education. So there happened to be a position that was full time, and followed more of the schools. Well, not followed more, like it followed the school schedule because they were a school. They were a school district. And it just so happened that at the time, that's exactly what I needed. I needed a little bit more structure in my schedule. The hospital, as it turns out, never closes. So we were like rotating, schedules. I could be there at night. I could be early morning. I could be there on the weekends. It was just, you were scheduled as you were scheduled on the rotating shift. Whereas the school district, provided or offered a bit more of a schedule that I can count on. I knew when I was going to be on. I knew when I was going to be off. So I ended up making the transition into the school setting, dedicated the last 10 years of my professional career in public education as an internal in-house interpreter and translator. And once I launched the podcast and, it developed, one thing led to another, I started meeting individuals outside of that particular niche and more specifically that particular community, because I belong to a community and in the school district, and I didn't really navigate outside of that until 2 years ago. And so now it's more of a, when it comes to show you what the power of networking does, that I started to connect with other professionals in the industry, and that's how people know you or get to know you and what you specialize in, by simply networking and talking with other individuals. And the podcast allowed me the opportunity. So that's why I get people that now that they know that I exist and what my working languages are, and what I can, what modes of interpreting I can do, people connect with you to see if you would be interested to work with them or if you would be interested in an assignment. So it's definitely different. Yeah, it's different. They might get a request to interpret and realize that they need a booth mate, or somebody to help them, when you need two interpreters because it's going to be long or intensive or whatever the specifications are. And they'll think of you for the assignment or for the opportunity.
And what was interpreting like when you went to the educational space?
A mess. I'm sorry. A mess. I'm going to be quite frank. And I say a mess compared to where I was coming from. Remember, the Children's Hospital was like, wow. Like, there was a model for language access services for their families. It just, it demonstrated how powerful when put together correctly, it can be for everyone involved in the service. And then I went to the school district and it was like, that's not the same thing. Like, interpreting and translating are two separate. It was just day and night. And so going into that, of course, I didn't know that. Again, I was still with this mentality that people understood the difference, especially if they were recruiting for the position. I thought that they understood the difference, and it wasn't until I entered that setting that I quickly realized that that was not the case. Working for an organization where there are hundreds of employees that you will potentially be working with, and hundreds of families as well, there's so many different dynamics at play. And so it was a steep learning curve, excuse me, in the sense that I had to come to the realization that there was no system in place to support the interpreter and translator, in addition to no systems in place to support the families that spoke a language other than English. And so there was just it was a very monstrous project, or just what I had embarked on was something completely different, and that took me to a whole different journey for my language professional journey. It was completely different.
For whatever reason, in my head, I thought being an interpreter within a hospital would be a lot more chaotic and not organized whatsoever. But like when you're doing interpreting in K through 12 schools would be a lot easier. I don't know why I thought that, but
I think it's the general consensus, to be honest. I think that or in a hospital setting, yeah, you think about all the running around and everything because of what we see on the front end, right? As patients, when we go in there, what we see, there's a lot of movement, and I can't say that the experience that I had at the Children's Hospital is the experience that anyone will have at any hospital, because it just depends on the systems and the processes that they've put together. Remember, I came from a general hospital, and that was not my experience at the general hospital in terms of just the systems that they had created in the Children's Hospital. It was totally different. I loved the structures that they had implemented. And many people do tend to think that educational interpreting is easy. And it turns out that out of all the different experiences that I had, the educational interpreting is where I applied most of the things that I learned in school, such as the different types of modes of interpreting. I applied all of them all the time at the school setting. Many people didn't, or me included, didn't realize or don't realize how much technical jargon there is in education, that as teachers, as specialists, as administrators, school administrators, you speak on that all the time. And so it seems normal. But for someone that is not in that setting all the time, so let's say, Joshua, you've got a child that is in special education, let's just say that as an example, and you are meeting with the teacher or an administrator that is going to talk to you about the services that are going to be offered in the assessments. They begin to talk in a language that you thought you understood, but then it's so technical, right? We're going to begin this IEP with the psychological assessment and all the results and the battery of tests that we just conducted to the child, including speech and language pathology. And then it's just, you're like, in English, you're like, wait, I'd slow it down just a little bit. And I did not catch any of that. So a lot of people, there's a big misconception that educational interpreting isn't as challenging, when the reality is it's just as challenging as other specialties.